boys and girls. So thank you as always to Gabriella and Nathan, and thank you to all of you for being so amazing through this journey of online Bible teaching and for listening so well. Now, I want to remind us just before we go into our story for today of the promises that God made to Abraham. Do you remember? Oh, a lot of weeks back we learned about 3 things that God had promised Abraham. And we're being promised believers, and it's important to remember that God keeps all of his promises. Even when it looks like it's not going very well for God's people in the Bible, God still keeps them, doesn't he? Okay, so God had promised Abraham a new land. And he had promised Abraham lots and lots of children. And he had promised that through Abraham's family, the whole world would one day be blessed. Now, we learned last week about how in the story of Joseph, Joseph ends up in a different land. What land does Joseph end up in? That's right, Joseph ends up in Egypt. And then because there's a famine, where does Joseph's family end up? That's right, they end up in Egypt. And our story today happens around 400 years, I think it's around 400 years after the story of Joseph. God's people are still in Egypt. They're not in the land that God promised. They're not there yet. They are in Egypt. And even worse than that, they're slaves in Egypt. They're not being treated very well. And so maybe it looks as though the promise of new land hasn't come true. Maybe it looks like the promise of new land isn't going to come true. God's people are waiting and they're crying out to God, and they are praying and praying that God would rescue them. Because life in Egypt is hard for them. They're not being treated very well. They are slaves. They're being made to work very, very hard. And they have been praying for a long time and waiting for a long time. And in our story today, we see how God works in the lives of his people. He works in the life of a particular person in our story today to bring about a great rescue plan for his people and to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Now, in our story today, the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has made a very bad plan because he is worried that God's people are now so great in number and so powerful that they might take over his country. And he makes a rule, he makes a choice that the baby boys who are born to God's people have to be taken away. And that's not a very good choice, and God's people are worried and they're wondering what's going to happen. But God is faithful and God will keep his promises. Even if it looks like things are going wrong and not the way that they should be going, God is in control, isn't he? And we've been learning that lots over the past year, that God is still in control. Even if things seem out of control, God is still in control. So we've got a wee video coming up now because we're thinking today about Moses and about what happens whenever Moses is born and how Moses' mommy really wants to protect him and really wants to save him from Pharaoh's bad plan. So enjoy the wee video clip coming up now. Listen well and we will think some more about Moses afterwards.